Tonight on the Daily Debrief, closing arguments in the death of a Georgia beauty queen. Did this man illegally try to cover up for his friend, the accused killer? Plus, more closing arguments in the case of murder on the farm. Did this man kill his mother for money? And jurors deliberate the fate of a Florida man who told police his dad was out having sex. Now he's charged with murder and dismemberment. The nation's top criminal cases are on the Daily Debrief. It's Thursday, March 21st. And good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Debrief. It's been a busy day here on the Law and Crime Network. Closing arguments in the case of a Georgia man accused of helping burn the body of a beauty queen in his family's pecan orchard. Bo Dukes is charged with concealing the death of teacher and pageant competitor Tara Grinstead. Dukes is further charged with making false statements and hindering apprehension in Willcott County, Georgia. He faces other charges in another county. A co-defendant is charged with Grinstead's actual murder. A forensic anthropologist said an area of discolored soil led to a dig and to bones from Tara Grinstead's skull and vertebrae.
Once an item had been identified as potentially being osseous or potentially being bone, it was set aside, and those items were bagged and cataloged on site. The color and the weight of the bones indicates burning. They're gray and black, bluish, all varied in colors, which are indicative of being burned.
How hot would a fire have to be to burn human bones?
That's very temperature dependent and dependent on the body itself and what remains of the body. To get to this degree of burning, it would have to be a very hot fire.
Okay. Any idea of what kind of degree that would have to be?
The general threshold is 1,200 degrees for a typical bonfire that would reduce a body to what we would call cremated remains, which are what we found in this case.
And again, Dukes is charged with concealing Grinstead's death, lying to police, and hindering apprehension. But the lead investigator said Dukes was eventually helpful, not only in finding Grinstead's remains, but in catching his co-defendant, Ryan Duke.
Cooperative in trying to get the forensic team to the correct location so that Miss Grinstead's remains could be located.
Talking about taking us out there to the, yes, he tried, yes.
Okay. And I believe there was some difficulty in locating the exact site.
Correct. For him that day there was.
You don't believe that difficulty was intentional or that he was trying to mislead you and put you in the wrong place?
No, not based on what he was trying to do and then subsequently did the following day.
Correct. And that's because these wooded locations, these orchards, these trees, they grow, the landscape changes. What something looked like in 2005 is not what it would look like 10 plus years later.
Potentially, yes, sir. Well, I mean, obviously over time, trees, bushes, they grow. And I think if you recall during the interview with him, I did ask him multiple times, you know, is this, I know things may look different with these trees still here, so on and so forth. So I was trying to determine that, whether or not he could really recognize that area.
And he was ultimately able to get you to the location, or get the GBI, I should say, to the location where the remains were found.
He and his uncle, Randy Hudson.
Okay, very good.
A parade of witnesses testified that Bo Dukes, this defendant, admitted playing a role in transporting and burning the body of Tara Grinstead. Bo Dukes seems to have confessed to a lot of people. First to the stand, his girlfriend's mother, who told jurors what Bo Dukes told her.
He had helped to dispose of the body, that they had burned it in the pecan orchard, and that it had been his truck that was used to transport the body.
That confession came during a questioning session which sprung from family tension.
If we wanted to see our daughter, if we wanted to celebrate holidays, if we wanted to be around her, we had to allow Bo back in the house because those were her stipulations, that Bo was the love of her life, and he was part of her life, and if we didn't want him in her home, she would not come into our home.
You solemnly swear?
An Army buddy testified Dukes told him what happened after a conversation about a billboard for information about victim Tara Grinstead. That led Dukes to implicate his co-defendant, Ryan Duke.
He had said that he had...
A verdict in the Bo Dukes case. We've got to go to court right now.
2017 CRW 038, Willcott County Superior Court, State of Georgia versus Bo Dukes. We, the jury, find the defendant count 1 making a false statement guilty. Count 2 making a false statement guilty. Count 3, hindering apprehension or punishment of a criminal, guilty. Count 4, concealing death of another, guilty. This 21st day of March 2019. Drop your blood for the foreperson.
Does counsel wish to look at the verdict form?
No, sir.
All right. All right, members of the jury, that completes your service. Do you have a check? Okay.
All right, it was a little bit tough for me to hear that, folks. We had to break out of the story we were covering to bring you that verdict. It came in very, very quickly after jurors asked to listen one more time to a key interrogation with the defendant himself. This is the bottom line here, not a big shock here. I want to bring my guest in right now into this discussion. Judge Ashley Willcott is here with me on the debrief. Judge Willcott, I know we're putting this together on the fly right now as we speak, but I thought it was guilty across the board on all the counts here. This was not much of a surprise to me. I don't think it was to you either.
No, I would agree with you, Aaron. It was guilty across the board. And let's just talk about the fact that, honestly, his story was, ooh, I don't remember giving my first statement denying any involvement. And the letter of the indictment and the actual words don't exactly match what I did. I thought it was a flimsy defense, so I'm not too surprised they did not find reasonable doubt.
Yeah, it was one of these cases where the defense was trying to slice and dice the statute very, very, very thin. And whenever the defense does that, it gets tricky for jurors because they've got to really get into the weeds and the nuances of the letter of the law. And a lot of times people just look at that and say, you know what, give me a break. We pass laws to cover a gamut of conduct. You know, this is not permissible, and then everything outside of it is. And when you try to narrow it down too much, jurors say, give me a break. You're admitting you were involved with this, and you've got to pay some kind of a penalty for basically telling police, no, I don't remember anything about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And don't forget, there was a second statement, and I think that's what the conviction is based on. And that's the fact that he then later said, oh my gosh, this is eating me up. It's making me feel bad. I'm going to confess. And these are all the things I was involved in, bearing, disposing of her body.
Exactly. Okay, Judge Willcott, stick around because we had another verdict come in on the Law&Crime Network this afternoon. This one was a not guilty verdict in the case of an Iowa farmer accused of murdering his mother over money. Prosecutors tried to convince a jury that Jason Carter killed Shirley Carter using his father's own gun and then staged the home to look like a robbery had occurred. The defense said during openings that Jason Carter loved his mother and there was no family tension. That claim backfired, though, with testimony from the defendant's own father and from a friend who said the defendant called his mother something less than savory. The defense questioned the state's timeline throughout this case. A defense expert said Shirley Carter was likely dead for a couple of hours before the defendant's father said his wife's body was exhibiting signs of rigor mortis, and that was just moments after the defendant also said he came across the scene. According to the defense, that means Jason Carter could not have been the killer. The state summed up its case by noting that the defendant said he was greasing up parts on a tractor, then said he wasn't, and then made some strange statements about parts of the house that were ransacked.
We know on that day, as Bill Carter told us, a law enforcement officer went and they looked at the zerts. Jason Carter then subsequently indicates he didn't grease the zerts, and that's fine. We've never asserted he did. We're just curious as why he would tell a person in the farm business who isn't going to be confused that he did grease the zerts. But it's the second comment that Jason Carter made to Brad Kaufman, which from the state's perspective is so incredibly telling. Jason Carter told Brad Kaufman, I went inside, I found my mom, I saw the office was ransacked, and my parents' bedroom was ransacked as well. Huh. That's curious, isn't it? Because Jason Carter never left the kitchen. Jason Carter never told anyone the bedroom was ransacked. The crime scene was staged. Common sense told us that. Nothing was taken except the things that were used to commit the offense. Staging means this wasn't a stranger who committed this offense. Burglars are strangers who commit burglaries. No one walks in for the purpose of trying to make it look more like a burglary. Staging means you are trying to distract from you, the perpetrator. Jason was trying to distract law enforcement.
The defense argued that Jason Carter's internet search history shows him looking for answers, not acting suspicious after his mother's death. The defense also said authorities could have made a case against almost anyone in the Carter family.
If you take things out of context, you could build a case against almost anyone in this matter. There are no answers yet. Billy Carter. No one denies. Billy Carter shows up on the scene and immediately says, I hope it wasn't the 270, which we later find out is missing and unaccounted for. There are also statements that Billy Carter makes that he admits are untrue. Could make a case against Billy Carter, and I bet if Billy Carter sat in a chair for 9 hours, could find some other statements. Could make a case against Bill Carter. He's made different statements. He actually has financial motive. He is the one who would inherit. And let's look at all the other leads that weren't followed. There were so many statements made about 3 individuals who don't have an alibi. Don't think for 1 second that there couldn't have been more done to establish. Agent Ludwig sat up here and he said, well, these kind of people couch surf or don't have jobs. He didn't say specifically any of these people, the individuals that we're talking about didn't. It was just sort of a generalization of people within that crowd. Well, we've established these people did have cell phones. Where was the follow-up to those leads? Only the clues surrounding Jason Carter were followed, and those clues are only statements that were made by someone who was clearly guessing and grasping and trying to figure things out.
Okay, so bottom line in this case, the defense argument won the day. Here is the emotional verdict.
Verdict number 1, we, the jury, find Jason Carter not guilty. Is that your verdict, ladies and gentlemen?
Yes, it is.
Mr. Bull, do you care to have the jury polled?
No, sir.
Very well. In light of the jury's verdict, I will enter a judgment of acquittal. Any bond previously posted by the defendant will be released and exonerated. Anything further on behalf of the defendant at this point, Ms. Branstead?
No, Your Honor.
On behalf of the state?
No, sir.
Very well.
That verdict led to one of the most emotional moments in court that we've seen in a couple of months, at least here on the Law and Crime Network, and protracted hugging, kissing there in the gallery. Judge Ashley Willcott back with me now. Judge Willcott, this verdict, I'll ask you the same question again. Was this one a surprise?
This one wasn't a surprise to me either. I think there were 5 different areas, Aaron, that they could have found reasonable doubt, and obviously did, and 1 or all of these. First is basically his word against his father's word. Second, there was no financial gain proven for him to have been the murderer. Third, there was no forensic proof, as you well know, based on the evidence. Fourth, there were 3 other individuals with no alibi presented, and the 5th was the timing of it all. So I'm not surprised they found no reasonable doubt with some of those different elements.
And the timing had to do with this statement from the father. At first he said, well, my wife's body felt stiff. In other words, rigor mortis. In other words, a couple of hours from death. He backtracked that on the stand. So when you say something close in proximity to the point at which you observed it, and then you try to backtrack on it later, usually people look at the initial statement as the one that's the most credible, and I think that's what the jury did here.
I would agree with you, Aaron. And I think, too, that he was very sympathetic. He was very emotional. The poor man, you can't even imagine what he's been through. But the fact of the matter is, I think it also made the jury perhaps feel like, wow, does he really remember, or was he so distraught he's not able to accurately remember what it was?
There were a lot of hugs in that courtroom after that verdict was read. It went on for minutes and minutes because you had the whole family there. You have a victim. This poor woman is gone. The father sitting behind the prosecution, a lot of the other family members sitting behind the defendant. almost every single one of them congratulated the defendant. The father did not. I was watching that feed very closely, trying to see if the father was going to walk up and basically try to reconnect with his son in that courtroom. He did not do it. Any sense of where this thing moves from here?
Well, listen, Aaron, this is what I said. I read that the father is estranged from his grandchildren, from different of the siblings. And so I think that now the only thing they can all do is move on. Is the father ever going to be able to reconcile with his son? He just testified against him and said, I believe he murdered my wife. So I hope they can, but I'm not convinced they will.
You know, and we also have the civil litigation that actually came first in this case. It was backwards from what we usually see. So the father has a $10 million civil judgment against the son. This is a victory for the son, but it's a short-lived victory.
Absolutely. And remember, it wasn't only the father that sued him, it was the father's other son, so this defendant's brother, that was involved in the civil lawsuit as well. It's there's going to be a lot of mending to do amongst this family, if it's even possible.
And Judge Willcott, I want to loop back yet again because we just saw the verdict moments ago here on the Debrief come down live in the Bo Dukes case out of Georgia. That was guilty across the board. There was a bit of discussion after the verdict about sentencing. The defense wanted some more time. The state wanted to push through with it. Bottom line, we're hearing sentencing is set for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. They're going to go straight into this.
Well, that's brutal, isn't it? It's a little unusual. But keep this in mind, you're in rural Georgia. They do not have court every day. In fact, it's my understanding they only have court trial, meaning trials, 1 week out of the month. And you know that the co-defendant, Ryan Duke, has a trial coming up as well. So timing-wise, I'm not surprised they're pushing through.
And Judge Willcott, you're the perfect person to talk about that because you're a judge in Georgia where you are right now. And yeah, it's a little bit tricky to keep the defendant and the co-defendant apart in this case. You've got Bo Dukes and then Ryan Duke without the S. They're not related. Their names are just one letter off. So a tricky case. Bottom line, additional trials coming up in that case. Judge Willcott, I know you'll be back with me at the end of the broadcast as we move into our discussion on the next case that we're following here. The jury is still out in a case of death, drugs, and dismemberment. The state says this man murdered his father, sawed up the body, tried to flee, and then concocted some bizarre stories to cover his tracks. That's the accusation. We'll talk about the defense when we take you back inside the courtroom in just a moment. Welcome back to the Debrief. It's been a very busy day. We are hearing there is a verdict in the James Scandirito case in in Florida. This is the case where a man is accused of murdering his father, chopping up the body, and burying some of it on a golf course. Prosecutors say James Scandirito Jr. took his father's money, had 2 passports, and lined up a private plane in hopes of fleeing the country. It's evidence, the state says, points to murder. The defense, however, says Scandirito and his father were actually dealing drugs. Scandirito took the stand and claimed his father died after taking drugs and that he chopped up the body to prevent the police from finding their stash or their illicit business. That's a summary of the case. Folks are gathering in that courtroom right now in Florida. We expect the verdict to be read any second here. Judge Ashley Willcott, we've had 2 live verdicts here on the Debrief. Just moments before on the Law&Crime Network, we had another one. This is just verdict, verdict, verdict today.
Well, this is why I love Law&Crime, because you see it here first. After covering the entire trial, you get to find out what the jury's doing live as it happens.
Exactly. Okay, we're looking into the courtroom off to the side here, and we're watching people filter into that courtroom, the jury asking if they can actually if they actually have to read the verdict live. You know, sometimes you get those jurors that are a little bit nervous about standing up with the actual verdict form and reading it out. That's why sometimes the judge reads it, sometimes a clerk or a bailiff or somebody else reads it. That's the process that's unrolling in that courtroom as we speak. We're waiting for that verdict to come out. Judge Willcott, this is another one that's been a little bit tricky. This jury got the case yesterday, and they deliberated a little bit yesterday. They went home. They went back at it all day today. They apparently have a decision we're hearing. I'm curious. I can't wait to see what they say in this one.
Oh, I completely agree with you. And here's the thing. I do not believe that that the state offered any proof that this man was actually murdered. It's circumstantial. I think it's believable that the son murdered him, but there was no actual proof of a murder that was admitted into evidence.
Exactly. Okay, so you have to backtrack with this one and say, okay, there's a body, and by I say a body, I mean a partial body, at the golf course. The son gets up on the stand. He admits that he carved up his father's body. He says he was high on drugs. He was out of it. He was worried about protecting his drug stash, all this other stuff. You know, he gets up there and says that, but then it's like, where's the head? Is the reason the head isn't there because it shows evidence of a premeditated murder? And where is the additional evidence if this was premeditated? So does this have to notch down from murder 1 to something else like murder 2? Or did the state just simply not prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt?
I don't know. I think it could be either one we're about to hear. But the other thing in this case, Aaron, that I think makes a big difference is his demeanor when he testified. He was so nonchalant, non-emotional. To me, it was rather creepy. And so I think it was an easy leap to think if he can describe dismembering his own father like this, he could have murdered his own father without a problem.
I mean, I can't wait to hear what this one's going to be, too. If I were on that jury, I would really have to be looking into the letter of the law and try to figure out, you know, is there enough here for premeditation? It's a big question. And look, I'm looking into the courtroom. The judge is not on the bench yet. We're hoping to bring you this verdict here on the debrief. If not, certainly a recap tomorrow. Judge Willcott, I feel bad for these jurors in a lot of ways because they've got to weed through some crazy facts here.
They do. And not only that, the emotion of it all. I mean, not only was a person dismembered, parts found in 2 separate bags, a head not found, it was done by his son, and it was done with testimony about drugs and the things they'd been doing. And these are not 2 people that you feel real sympathetic for, but it's really a horrific murder crime.
Exactly. You know, look, I mean, we're waiting now. The defendant is sitting in court. We're waiting to see how quickly they get this together, hoping that we get it in on the debrief today. Again, as I said, and not only do you have all this testimony from the defendant, but you have his interrogation, Judge Willcott, where he was initially asked, okay, you know, what happened? What happened to your dad? And he says, oh, my dad asked me for Viagra, and I assumed he was out having sex. And now he's up on the stand saying, oh, yeah, no, I was carving him up.
Yeah, not only that, but in his statement, he also said, well, all I could think about was I had to get rid of the drugs. Well, then why didn't you get rid of the drugs instead of chopping your father apart? It just doesn't make sense. His story does not add up.
Okay, well, we're here on the debrief. We're going to wrap the day up, apparently, because this verdict is not yet in. So bottom line, we're going to stick around here on the Law&Crime Network if you're watching us on the network. Here on the debrief, we've got to end things for the day. We'll bring you this on Twitter, on our website, and back here tomorrow. Stick around on the network.